safe distance.
You're the resident expert on this. As a target.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. You want to
I just realized about what height this is going to hit me.
Yeah, we did that earlier. Don't worry about it. It'll be okay.
This will be like a soccer game. I'll be like, hey.
You're rolling. Turn it on.
Right, here we go.
Then aim.
Ready? Good job.
Is that fun?
Yeah, that was so funny. I want to do it.
Say it into the microphone.
Yeah, here you go. Say it again.
Yeah.
Here, say it.
Yeah,
Here, grab it.
Whatever comes out. Whoop, made that.
Oh, no action.
There you go.
Here, wait. When I tell you to, drop it in, okay?
Hold it up there first. Wait till he turns it on. Yeah, exactly.
Forgot. Okay.
Alrighty, guys. Good job.
excuse me, let's put all the balls in. How do I do it? Split all the balls.
Mic for you?
Well, yeah, actually, if you could. Okay. What's up?
So just because we're starting vaguely late, do not change.
Oh, no, everything's cool. Everything's cool. All right, ready to start? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Leonard. If you're familiar with the Demoscene, you may know me as Trickster of Hornet. If you're not familiar with the Demoscene, you may know me as the co-founder of MobyGames.com. Unlike last year, I am here to talk about one of those things. I'm here to talk about our work, my work in the demo group Hornet, and various things that we did to come up with the Mind Candy DVD series of archiving demos. Just show of hands real quick, how many people here are familiar with the Mind Candy DVDs and or have seen them? Okay, cool. All right. I wish I had more time. I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to try to target it, so hopefully this won't go too fast or too slow. It'll be just right. Generally, I'm going to try to spend just a minute on preserving history in general and preserving demos. Then I'll go into a little bit more about archiving multimedia art forms, some of the things you should be concerned about, and then finally some of the very specific lessons we learned while making the Mind Candy series. So why preserve anything at all? My friend Jason Scott sums it up very succinctly. We have no way to know what is historically significant. Doesn't mean we should hoard everything obsessively, OCD-like. Probably not, but it's the basic rule that you can always throw away stuff that isn't significant, but you can't generate lost material. So generally, it's good to don't be subjective and editorial as you're gathering the information. You do it afterwards. And so why would we even bother archiving Demoscene history? Well, just like any underground subculture, every culture is worth preserving. Every culture is historically and sociologically significant. So why not? Many smaller scenes have been covered and archived, and so the Demoscene is no different. There are some practical reasons too. It can be historically significant to examine the beginnings of careers of people that started in the scene. Future members of Future Crew, for example, by examining their earlier work, you can gain some insight into their later work in Remedy. Remedy, of course, makers of the game I can't remember the name of. Max Payne, thank you. And Fat Hammer, which recently did, I think, a Tomb Raider remake. And members of Anarchy and Lemon went on to become a big part of core design. Also Tomb Raider, actually, now that I think about it. You can draw your own parallels. And not only that, but there's also, by examining some of the old scene history, we can get algorithmic ideas for modern day. Cell phones currently, and at least not all of them, have 3D rendering, so there's still a need for software rendering in cell phones and things like that. So one of the challenges archiving any culture is that the subject itself is only the start. You can point your camera at it and record it or get it off of somewhere, but you really have to archive a lot more if you want to do a decent job. Community, of course, such as the demographics, no pun intended, of the people involved in the culture. That's one of the ways that we can examine, for example, how demos tend to kind of split into a traditional, kind of an old school style and a modern style. Context as well, the place of the people. This is actually one thing that's curious to examine. The question that's asked a lot is, why are most seen as European? I think one of the jokes is that because a lot of the Scandinavian countries, how they're Norway and Finland and Sweden, they have really long, cold, harsh winter months, and so there's really not much else to do except stay inside and code. And differences as well. When you're archiving something, you can't take two viewpoints and discard one of them. They're both equally valid. And one particular example in the Demoscene is something like copies. There's one school of thought that copying a picture is incredibly lame. It shows no forethought. And then the other school of thought is that it takes incredible skill to reproduce something, given the fact that you have a limited color palette and limited tools. Which one is right? They're both right. They're both equally valid. So you need to take all this into account. How much archival is enough? Like any source, it depends. In the case of demos, you can do the basics, which is preserving the source material so that others can try to run it. You can show a screenshot. This is what Pouet does, the website, and scene.org. Better is that you can show the code running in an emulator or compatible environment. The best way to do this is to show it running on the actual hardware, and for extra credit, you can provide some context. I have a small example here. Let's see if I get this to run. So here's a demo. It is a screenshot. It's nice, but it doesn't really mean anything. Then you can run it in an emulator. Okay, it has sound and something going on. You could stop there. And a lot of people do stop there. Or you can show it running on the actual target hardware it was programmed on and developed for. And now you can see that the emulator is not perfect. We have moving copper bars going on in the background. In fact, we've got copper bars at the top and the bottom. Also, interestingly, we can see that they weren't very good at coding because we've got a little bit of interference over here. And I'll give you the extra credit for context. So you can do that and almost be done with it. The context is that what that was a CGA card, which is only capable normally of displaying 4 colors in graphics mode, and yet you were seeing 16. Now that you know that, it takes on a whole new meaning. Well, how the heck did they do that? The Mind Candy DVD series was an attempt to archive Demoscene history. Obviously, we started with the subject, which was video that matched the original. For context, we captured, with few exceptions, we captured it on the original hardware that it was meant to run on. For our community contribution, we got audio commentary from as many authors as were willing to give it to us, and for culture, Dan Wright, a member of our group, put together a nice booklet with the help of Phoenix that had a timeline of the history of the demos and the machines that they ran on. So if you want to do this, what are some of the basics that you need to know to try to archive your particular multimedia art form? The very obvious one is garbage in, garbage out. You have to start with the best possible quality source. And I'll get into ways that you can do that because, obviously the more generations you're going to have to go through this information, whatever form it is going to have to go through. You want to keep the more noise or the dirtier it is, the worse it's just going to get with every subsequent generation. Knowing the properties of your source, the frame size and the display rate is important so that you can maintain, you can try to eliminate garbage in, garbage out. It may not always be best to exceed the original. It may not always be best to capture at a better resolution and better frame rate than your source, and I can get into that a little later. In-band capture is a great way to at least get started. If the state of emulation had been the way it was in 2000, it may have changed the direction of how we did the first disc. There are hundreds of emulators, and the older the platform you are trying to archive, the better the emulator is because the more static that platform is. A Commodore 64 is a Commodore 64. it's not like it went through several revisions and several processors and several memory configurations. It's a Commodore 64, so generally the emulators are pretty darn good. But don't use an emulator unless you can verify it against the real hardware, because no matter how good that emulator is, you're still not perfectly sure. And you may be saying, you know, Jim, if I have the original hardware, then why would I use the emulator? Because if you can verify it is perfect, it gives you an extremely clean capture of what it is you're trying to do. And like I said, garbage in, garbage out. If you can get a nice resolution exact, frame rate exact capture with no noise, by all means go for it. In-band capture is a great thing that has recently surfaced on the Windows platform. You can use a wonderful far brush tool called Capture to it slows down a demo and makes it think it's running real time, but what it does is on every page refresh it dumps the screen to disk, so you can get a perfect capture of demos that way. Perhaps as a real-time solution, which I would only recommend if Capture isn't working and you have a honking fast machine. If in-band capture is not an option, you have to do something like analog. You have to capture it from running on the original machine in some way. I would heavily recommend that you look into something called scan conversion, which is a box that will take a particular signal and convert it to some other signal. An obvious pro is quality. The cons, unfortunately, are cost and complexity. The more flexible ones are considered broadcast quality, and they usually range like $1,000 if you get them on eBay, all the way up to a nice Folsom unit, which last I heard was $14,000. You can get a cheap one for $35 or thereabouts, and it may be, if it's all you can afford, it's better than nothing. If you can't verify that the emulation is perfect, it's better than nothing. An obvious example of this, you may think that if I just take the native analog output of a machine that is capable of it, like you know, a Commodore 64 or, and in this case, an A1200 and A1000, which actually output composite color, that would be the way to go. And as you can see, it isn't, because this is actual composite color output from the machine, and we've got like Luma Chroma crosstalk here because the signals are mixed into the same cable. Scan conversion takes the RGB native output and converts it into something really high quality to your specifications. You can adjust the resolution, you can adjust levels, and then it pumps it out also via a high quality method as well. In this case, it was component. When you're capturing analog, pay attention to the very basics: shielding, cable length. True story, when I had to do some Windows captures for the first disk, we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't have high-quality scan conversion options to us, so I was, in fact, taking the S-video output of the Windows machine and putting it into the S-video input of our capture hardware. The cable was long enough that it was picking up EMI or RFI, or both. It was bad. So I used a shorter cable, and so the shorter the cable, the less chance noise has to get into it. The problem now is that the machines were right next to each other, and the video card was generating so much noise that it was also being picked up by the capture card, and so I still had a problem. I came up with an idea of making a little cardboard horseshoe and layering layers of tinfoil on top of it, and then another layer of cardboard over that, and I would actually put that on top of the video card for certain captures. Back then, video cards didn't require 400 watts and two-stage cooling, so you could run the video card, covered up like that for 5 or 10 minutes. And again, if you have a scan converter that can do component or S-video out, then you go with component because it's just simply a better signal, and hopefully you'll have the capture hardware to match. And HDMI is a nice. This is also something that's very cool. In the last year and a half, you can get a card if you have, let's say, something that you can't get any sort of output from it, so your choice to archive it is to point an HD camera at it. You can actually HDMI plug the camera directly into a capture card for less than $300, and it will stream raw directly from the camera to the hard disk. Obviously, you're going to need a very fast hard disk array to do this, but it's perfect. It's even better than taking the HDV tape out of the HD camera and doing it, because HDV is slightly lossy. And resist the urge to use DV, which I will get to in a second. Any codec that you capture in, it has to be lossless. It just has to be. Because if the codec is throwing stuff away and you don't know what it's throwing away, then you don't know what you have. It may seem insignificant, but as I said earlier, we have no way to know what is historically significant because we don't live in the future. And know what chroma subsampling it uses, which leads, again, to please resist the urge to use DV. DV boxes are great. They're like $100, and you plug analog into them in one end or VGA into one end, and you get FireWire out the other end, and it goes right into the computer. You're thinking, hey, great, it's DV, it's digital video, and the FireWire is digital as well, and so there can't be any loss. It must be perfect. It's imperfect. DV uses 411 chroma subsampling, and what that means is that, let me get a pointer here, that for every 4 pixels of luma, which is your grayscale, you've only got 1 pixel of chroma, which is the color. And so what happens is when you take something that differs in chroma only, if you were to convert this bitmap to grayscale, you'd see it was like a flat sheet. This is what happens, and because there's only 1 color for every 4 columns, it stretches across, and of course it looks like garbage. So it's okay for real-world footage. It's not necessarily good for something that can be very crisp, like a multimedia art form like demos. This was the capture path that we used for the second disk, for the Amiga disk. We have our multimedia source, thank you Laxity, and goes to a scan converter. From the multimedia source to the scan converter, it was RGB analog output converted to a VGA DB15 through an adapter that went into the scan converter. On the outside of the scan converter to the capture hardware, this was components, so it was your red, your green, your blue cables, component cables. And our capture hardware, we had a DeckLink SP card, which, as you can see, allows component input. And so that was pretty much about as good as it could get. Now I have also here an extremely badly drawn line to a monitoring device. I would encourage you, if you're doing this seriously, to get some sort of an external monitoring, like in this case, this is a JVC broadcast monitor. You can use a regular monitor as well, but the reason I recommend an external one is because you can calibrate it easier than you can calibrate your regular computer monitor. Which leads us to calibration, actually. You've got to calibrate your levels before you start. A lot of this sounds like common knowledge, but I'm seeing some efforts that are starting today that are missing these things. If you can't do in-band capture and you have to resort to some sort of analog capture, you need to know about these things. Adjust both your input and your output. That means adjust and actually I'll start with the output. Adjust your broadcast monitor first using a known good generator. I used a DVD player with all settings set to nothing. No cinema mode, no theater mode, nothing, just flat. And a reference DVD. In my case, I used Joe Kane's Digital Video Essentials. And you get your monitoring device calibrated first, then you can use it to calibrate your input. So when you're fiddling with your sliders in your capture software or drivers, or you're fiddling with the knobs on your scan converter, you now have an actual reference that you can use to get that right. If possible, please capture at the same frame rate as the source. That means don't take a PAL Amiga and capture it as NTSC. Don't take an NTSC source and capture it as PAL. You'll be adding or deleting frames to match your capture hardware. Dropping frames is obviously bad because those are moments in time you'll never get back. Adding is not necessarily better because now you still have a jerk in any sort of motion because you now have a frame that is doubled in time, and you have to edit those out, and that's just as much of a pain in the ass. Adjusting the scan converter resolution can avoid some Mare interference pattern artifacts, and I'll show you an example of that. If you don't have calibration software on your source machine, draw your own. There are test pattern generators for Windows. There's even some for Mac and Amiga, and I believe I saw one for Commodore 64. But what if you're trying to archive a Spectrum? What if you're trying to archive an Atari 8-bit? Grab a paint program and draw your own. Draw a solid white, draw a solid black, a ramp. Draw your own test patterns. Anything is better than nothing. This isn't the exact one I used, but draw something like this. You've got vertical, horizontal, and 50% patterns for your resolution adjustment, and I'll show you what happens if that goes wrong. And then a ramp both ways, because some analog output generation, I don't understand completely the mechanics behind it, but you can generate different artifacts going from high voltage to none or none to high voltage, so it's good to have them both on the same page. Now, go ahead and stare at this for a second, and I'm going to switch to the bad one in 3, 2, 1. Okay. This is what happens when you're not capturing at the right res. You get these interference patterns. This was only 5% off, and yet, if you had a dot hatch pattern like you do see in a lot of demos, this is what happens, and it's garbage. You have to start over. Another common problem is that if the levels were off, you would see entire ranges collapsed into black. Here the blacks are completely crushed, so any shadow detail is completely gone. And I'm actually going to go back, stare at the colors for a second. I'm going to go back to the good one and then the bad one. The color, now this is, I don't know if you can tell, this is a slightly purple. This is also slightly purple. And that's only a 15-degree phase variation in hue. That's like what, 1-2% out of normal? So it's very important to calibrate. Any capture format you use must be lossless. It just has to be. Because again, if you're capturing in something lossy, you don't know what is getting lost. The first Mind Candy disk, this was the PC and the PC version, the old school DOS and Windows one. The only capture hardware we had available to us that had a high quality transport was lossy, unfortunately. It was a very high quality codec, but it was still lossy, and we had to plan our workflow around it, meaning whenever we were to process video, if there was just some level we couldn't adjust before we captured it, we had to make sure that it went through the least amount of generations, recompression generations, edit generations as possible. Because even if an area of a screen doesn't change at all, it's still going to get manipulated by the mere fact that you're editing it in a lossy codec. For storage, the whole point of archiving is to keep them around. So obviously, hopefully you would want to actually store these materials. Please choose some sort of platform agnostic transport. I would say QuickTime, except QuickTime runs on 2 platforms. I would be hoping that something a little bit better. But QuickTime's all right as long as you're using a lossless codec. But the problem with QuickTime lossless codecs is that they are not free. And so, at least not all the ones that I have seen. Now, I could be wrong about this. Is the codec source available? Can FFmpeg decode it? FFmpeg is, of course, the open source library that you see in MPlayer, and I don't think they use it in VLC, but it's used a lot, and it sucks in libav codec and lots of other open source stuff, so that's already there. Because you need to think about who's going to try to use this footage, even yourself, if it's not someone else, in the next 10, 20 years. And if you can't decide, then have it massively uncompressed and raw. I hope you've got 20 gigabytes of space for 3 minutes. But you'd be surprised what 7-zip can do to it. And at least 7-zip, again, open source, you'll still be able to do something with it in the future. If you take one thing away from this, I hope it's this. When you are capturing or acquiring your source, delivery should not be your concern. I have seen some efforts where they're like, I'm going to capture video and I'm going to put it up on the web. So they capture to a web format. And that's useless because you can't do anything with it after that. And you've probably, who knows what you've thrown away doing that. Yesterday's audience was DVD. Today's is the internet with YouTube and various other things like that. Tomorrow, it's going to be IPTV or some sort of other on-demand service. In a decade from now, anything less than HD resolution is going to be unacceptable. If you're capturing directly to YouTube format, you're not helping anybody, to be honest. It's a little harsh, but so get it right the first time so you can meet unknown challenges. You can always downsample to YouTube. You can't upsample to HD. Some of the very specific lessons we learned making Mind Candy is that contacting the creators can sometimes result in just a cornucopia of bonuses. We would occasionally get unreleased versions that fix bugs or rendered out to an AVI and WAV file, or sometimes both in the case of Toasted. Unfortunately, we didn't put Toasted on the disk, but I'm going to show it to you a little later on. You also get confirmation from the creators exactly the target hardware that they created it for. A lot of Commodore 64 purists will throw a brick at you if you're recording their SID on a machine that isn't exactly. I guess there were 2 SIDs. The Commodore 64 at some point switched SIDs. They throw a hissy fit. So one of my favorite examples is that Martin Galway released a CD of his stuff, and its output, the recording on the CD is output from his 22-year-old Commodore 64. It doesn't get more authentic than that. And at the very least, get them to verify your efforts, even if you did have to go the emulator route, even if there were problems with it. Getting their stamp of approval means something. It can add a little bit of context or verification to it. Sometimes you have to cheat. That sometimes should probably be always. Sometimes there are problems inherent in capturing computer video output that you don't see in the broadcast world, and because of that, the broadcast world doesn't have tools to deal with it. For example, goofy display behavior where the resolution, the actual broadcast standard switches on you halfway through the demo. Like some guys said, I want 60 hertz now, bang, and then your scan converter flips out because it was capturing 50 hertz and now it has to deal with 60. And things like frame rate conversion. Love is one of those demos that does that, in fact, and we had to, for the parts that switched into 60 hertz, the scan converter flipped out, and when it switched back to 50, it would sync up and we'd keep going, but how do we get these 60 hertz parts? Well, I had to run WinUAE and capture it that way, and then mix them in I just spliced them into the demo, and it was either that or not have the demo at all on the disk, and we felt it was a worthwhile compromise, and we disclosed what we did in the production notes so that if someone says this is authentic, well, it's authentic with a caveat, and at least you know what that caveat is. You can also attempt to hack the software to get it to run the way you need it to run for capturing. There may come a day when there are no more A500s left in the world, but maybe someone has an A4000 left. You can use software like WHD Load, which was, I think, originally written for games, but there are a lot of loaders for demos as well. It loads the demo, and before it, or any game or whatever program you're trying to run, and it patches it. It's got several hundreds of patches you can download. It'll patch it in RAM and then run it, so you can get it to run on any hardware you need it to. For changing display standards, if you want to disassemble the program and figure out where to patch it to get the video mode to change, you can do that. We didn't actually archive Crystal on the first disk, but if you needed to capture it at NTSC, you can patch it. Just two examples. I personally prefer hacking the hardware for better output. One of my favorite tricks that I learned, I believe by accident in the mid-1990s, was that if you have an ATI PCI video card that supports TV out, and you connect only the TV out and boot the machine, it will in fact init in TV out mode. So that's great for things that, like, if you ever wanted to archive what your machine's BIOS looks like. I mean, that's before the machine is booted, so you can go ahead and get TV out of that. But the better trick is that once it was initialized to TV out mode, every single video mode that you initialized was forced to that particular display rate. So normally VGA runs at 70 hertz. We'll do this, and now you've just forced it to 60, and you didn't have to patch any software, and you didn't have to do any screwy tricks. Well, other than booting in with a card with TV out mode. That had some caveats, which I'll get to, but for the most part, it was a great way to handle frame rate conversion issues. If my demo runs at 70, how do I capture it at 60? This way you can force it to run at 60. Lots of other hardware, the 2600, the Spectrum, and others, you can actually hardware mod them to get composite video output. Composite video is, now the thing is though, the Spectrum is should disclaim this, the 2600 and the Spectrum are somewhat bad examples because the emulators for them are extremely solid. But just in case you were trying to do something new with a machine and you wanted to archive it and the emulator wasn't up to snuff and you needed to capture from these machines, you can hardware mod them for composite video output, which is good because normally they have RF output, which is where the Luma, the Chroma, and the audio are all crammed into this very noisy signal. And to be honest, I don't know how to capture RF. I've never looked into it. I hope I never have to. Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bitters made after August of 1984 can use adapters for S-video output. So do a lot of research with with enthusiast groups of the platform you're trying to archive. You could learn how to get better output from it. And sometimes cheating backfires. The forcing specific refresh rates will break a lot of demos, unfortunately, because the whole point of a demo is to show off how well you can manipulate and control the machine. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a great demo, and it's a great demo because it's almost entirely raster effects that are very timing specific, and if you try to force 60 hertz on it, it will just hang. Crystal Dream 2 will skip entire sections. Or it can cause them to run with a different timing. If you try to run Second Reality at 60 hertz, it runs just fine, but the music is really slow and gets desynchronized. So you can't use those as is, but you can use the video only sometimes to get a clean capture for any sort of restoration or post-processing work that you would want to do. And emulation can sometimes be too accurate, and this can lead you to some other pitfall. Let me give you a quick example here. You would think, one of the problems with trying to get a good capture of a demo called Crystal Dream, the first one by Triton, is that a lot of people have, oh, that's not good. Not a lot of people still have a Sound Blaster Pro and a 486 or 386 to run them anymore. So you would think, I'll just pop into DOSBox and run it and capture it. Well, DOSBox, at least of right now, does not emulate the programmable interrupt controller perfectly. And so if you try to choose Sound Blaster sound, it doesn't work. And if you try to choose any other sort of sound, it sounds like ass. So you would think one way you can get around this is, well, okay, it runs in DOSBox. I'll just choose no sound and capture it with just the video, dump that to disk, and then I'll rip out the mod and render it out and use that as the soundtrack, because the demo is not it's not synced to the music at all. It's just the music just runs, so you can do this and call it authentic. You'd think you could rip it out and play it and render it and you'd be fine, but you actually can't. Let me play a small section of that soundtrack and listen for the portamento in the middle. Okay, I'll play it again. Okay, that's as it outputs on the Sound Blaster Pro. Now if you render it out, you get this. I'll do it again. Did anyone catch what happened to the portamento in the middle? It goes all the way up, and it doesn't, and it's not right. Now, what happened? Was the mod ripped improperly? Was the mod broken? Is the player that I used to render it out broken? Neither. They're both fine. It's the demo that's broken. The demo is a broken player, and instead of fixing the player in the demo, they altered the data in the mod file to compensate for the bugs in the player. So that mod will only play properly in that demo. And you may think this is just it's just a tiny portamento slide. Who cares? Well, the thing is, if you noticed that, what didn't you notice? So you have to capture it authentically in order to be safe. It didn't sound as good. The Sound Blaster Pro output is terrible, but that's the only way to be sure. The purists, archival purists more diehard than me, will say no processing. I say there will come a time when you need to. When you capture something analog, nothing is absolutely 100% perfect. You're going to have some noise in the signal at some point. So, and your encoder is a good little boy, and it tries to preserve noise as much as picture content. So you should pay attention to that and filter it out if it's visible. You will need to post-process at some point to convert to a broadcast standard. Garbage in, garbage out means you capture at exactly your source, but sometimes you end up with something like a 70 hertz or 75 hertz file. And there is no broadcast standard that's 75 frames a second. It's pretty much NTSC, which is 60, or PAL, which is 50. So you may need to do something to down convert that. There are several different ways to do that. You should be prepared for that if something else actually needs to use your archival source. Tweak modes, an example of which I will show later on, also called fake modes, are pretty much unwatchable without the original hardware because they exploit display properties of the hardware to, say, fake additional colors or something like that. So be prepared. If you can't distribute your work, then your work was somewhat, the effort was wasted. And here's an example. This, if you've seen the Mind Candy 2 production notes, you've seen this picture before. This is an example of what we see on the left side and what the MPEG-2 encoder sees on the right side. This is not retouched that much. It's not like I took the right side and dirtied it. All I did was adjust levels a little bit so you can see the noise that was actually in there. And if you look at the left side, it looks fine, right? It looks like a solid sheet. So very subtle things can cause havoc when you're encoding. So let's see, how are we doing on time here? I actually got a lot of time. Let's take some examples of this. There are a couple of demos we didn't put on either disk. I'm only going to show you some DOS ones today, but the principles apply for any platform that you're trying to archive. Crystal Dream, as I mentioned before, has problems with sound. So how are we going to get this in a form that we can put on the web, in a form that we can archive to DVD, in a form that we can give away in the future? Does it run in DOSBox? It does, but the sound is ass. Not only that, but the display rate, DOSBox has a retrace emulation bug where if the display rate is too fast or something, in this particular demo there's flickering. Can we get it off the hardware? Yeah, but we have the frame rate issue where the hardware generates at 70. But our capture technology, our analog capture technology only runs at 50 or 60. So a solution for this is to capture it in both. Capture it on the hardware to get good audio, to get around the bug in DOSBox, And we also get a reference run. The frame rate and the video stuff may be screwy, but at least we get an idea of how the demo is supposed to run, timings, things like that. And then capture it in DOSBox and use a slow update rate in one part to avoid the flicker, but otherwise take the video from that and merge them together. The frame rate will not be at 100% optimal in that one part, but until DOSBox fixes its emulation bugs, this is the best we can do. I was surprised to see that video of this demo was not online yet, at least not the two places that are common to look at, so I went ahead and did it for you. And I'm going to, and this is exactly what I did. I captured the hardware off the real machine, because I illustrated the bug before, and this is the video off of DOSBox. I'm not going to play the whole thing through, but I'll play through the two interesting parts. Just want to make sure I have time at the end for other stuff, so we'll stop it there. But obviously I'll be contributing this to the various video archival sites that are for demos that are out there as well, so this won't be the only time you'll see it. And let's try another one, and this is actually one that I get asked a lot about. Gustar by Kimura is one of several demos that employed a fake mode. And so what is it? Let me stop for a second. What is a fake mode or a tweak mode? Some demos tried to display more colors than the hardware was willing to give them. For example, VGA was standard 256 colors at one time. Tweak modes alter the video hardware to do things like a really fast refresh rate, and then you can flip between two pages of differing colors, and the flipping is fast enough that your eye blends them into one. Fake modes are things where they would arrange the pixels in a certain way such that it was like a dot hatch pattern, you know, red, green, merges together into something that's neither red nor green. So some demos would do that. The problem is that when you capture them, they are still in that format and they're unwatchable. So we'll take Gustar. This is a request from Rare Fluid that I do this. Does it run in DOSBox? It does. It runs beautifully, but the tweak mode makes it incredibly difficult to watch. And could we capture off the hardware? We could, but we still have the same frame rate conversion issue. Plus, no amount of scan converter options are going to deal with all tweak modes. You may get lucky with one or two of them. So the solution is to capture it in DOSBox, blow it up, blow up a still frame or two to physically examine it, and you may have to take a few frames in succession to see if it's trying to do some sort of a page flip trick. And post-process it, usually with a convolution kernel, and then that you can store and distribute that, but also store the original, because no matter how good you think you are, you may not be doing it perfectly. So make sure you have the original to distribute as well, so that they can try their own. And there's historical significance to holding onto the original as well. People can say, well, what's a tweak mode? What's a fake mode? Well, now you can show them what it actually looks like. So this is a blow-up of a frame from Gustar. And there's two things you can note about it. One is that each pixel column is actually 4 pixels wide. I drew these 4 white pixels as a measuring thing. So you can actually see it's actually 4 pixels wide. So that's of some historical significance. But the main thing is that we see that this, blown up, is really red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue of various intensities. And since it's only in the vertical domain, like we don't see any, like this edge of the star here is clearly this edge here. So since it doesn't blend this way but only this way, we can use a convolution filter in just the vertical domain. VirtualDub happens to have such a filter. For those of you unfamiliar with convolution kernels, what happens is that the whole kernel runs through the demo lengthwise and widthwise, or heightwise and widthwise. And, the video footage. The center pixel is calculated from mathematical values of the surrounding 9 in this particular kernel. Since we only want to kind of, I don't want to say blur, that's not really the right term, but blend or aggregate in the vertical domain, you just use something like this. Give me, for the pixel in the middle, give me everything that it was, plus the one above, plus the one below. And you turn that into that. Now it's watchable. And I can show you what it looks like. And for this particular example, I've done it split screen. Now see, if you were to try to take, let me actually go back to that for real quick. You could try to put that on the web. But what normally happens is that the resizing algorithm either creates interference patterns, doesn't blend right, or worse, it'll just drop stuff and you'll get only the red component. Oh, that's great. So that actually looks like this. This is a short intro, so I'm going to go ahead and play the whole thing for you. Now you may think, why did they ever do this? That's because at the time, monitors had a really fat, fuzzy dot pitch, and so you really couldn't see the scan lines as clearly as you can see them here in the raw output. And to get context for this demo, this is actually not a demo, it's a 64K intro. So it's the total, if you're not familiar with demos, the total size of the entire EXE is 64K and uses no other data to do it. Obviously, I'll make the unsplit screen comparison version of this available. I don't think people want to see filtered when they watch the demo. Another case example, Toasted is a demo that runs just fine in DOSBox and on the hardware. So you can, and it runs at 60 because it runs in 320 by 240 which is a 60 hertz mode. But this is the benefit of when you get to contact the author and do your legwork, and he'll tell you that I have a version that renders to AVI in WAVE. Would you like it? Hell yeah. That not only means I get exactly the demo as the author intended it to be viewed, but he actually managed to fix a bug or two, and he altered one of the effects. It used to be grayscale, and now it's color. So I am going to show just a part of that. I'm going to show the beginning part, so you can see the very beginning used to be grayscale, now it's color. And then I'll go to the part that everybody seems to like, which is the roller coaster part. Now, I believe in maybe this was fixed in the bug fix version. Phoenix can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I distinctly recall that the release of this. Can we turn up a little bit, possibly? Because I can't alter the volume for this. Now it's in color. For those curious, this is a software-rendered voxel landscape with full 6 degrees of freedom, which is not something you saw in the typical voxels at the time. All right, just for time constraints, I'm going to go to part most people want to see. Because we contacted the author and we got a rendering version, we have no skips, no jumps, no issues with playback or capture at all. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to put together a case example for the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I'll still talk about it quickly. The good, the bad, and the ugly is a demo that does a lot of amount of graphical effects using very explicitly timed timings. It's a lot of raster effects, and because of that, there's no actual frame buffer to capture. It's all being drawn as each scan line is coming down, so you can't emulate it, at least not with a traditional emulator. You have to have a really good one that emulated VGA exactly on a scan line by scan line basis. So it doesn't run in DOSBox, at least not perfectly. It's also forced to 70 hertz, and if you try to use my TV out trick on it, it locks up and won't run at all. So how are we supposed to get a decent capture of this? How are we supposed to show this demo to anybody? The answer is unfortunately a costly one. There are a few series of scan converters that do field adaptive blending, and they will take different output rates, and instead of dropping or adding entire frames to match your target, they will blend, they will interpolate the data across time. So they'll kind of blend it forward or backward as necessary. It results in a little bit kind of a ghostly image, but until DOSBox has 100% perfect emulation, this is really the best we can do. So here's some resources. I'll have this presentation up on my website in less than a week, so you don't necessarily have to try to remember this or write them down. If you don't have the Mind Candy DVDs, and if you're curious to see them and want to grab a copy, Trickster and Phoenix were here all weekend. If there are two sites that I know of that are whose sole purpose is to get video of demos. One is Worst Captures, and the other is a new site being started up by Mixam, who's here somewhere, called Capped. And Pouet, if you go into pouet.net and look at a demo, sometimes you'll see a link to video, and you can grab the video from wherever that's hiding. If you ever have to do any sort of video processing, start at the Doom 9 forums, because not only will they have references to a ton of free tools that you can use, AVI Synth in particular is a bit of a Swiss Army knife for video, so is VirtualDub. But it's also a great forum to ask questions. I've got this 75 hertz emulator dump, and I need to put it on a DVD. How can I translate the frame rate properly? And you'll get some really good responses there. And the reason I have the Doctor Who restoration team up here is just because they have some really cute war stories of the kind of footage that they have had to work with to try to restore old Doctor Who shows for which sections are missing or badly degraded, or the only format they had was actually encoded to NTSC, or transcoded to NTSC, and that's all they have to work with, but they got to restore it for PAL, and some good stories there. And if you have the Mind Candy DVD, there are production notes which may have mentioned things that I missed. That is my email, and before we discharge in approximately 5 minutes, does anyone have any questions? No? I'm that good? What? Another what question? Oh, see the lights in my eyes. I can't see. Yes, sir.
You talked about limitations and, I guess for lack of a better term, inaccuracies within DOSBox.
Yes.
Have you taken those, documented them, and thrown them at the DOSBox team to fix?
I've actually corrected one of them. If you do mode equals CGA, you will get a font that I provided them directly out of a PC Junior, and I can explain why it was a PC Junior, not a PC. It's not relevant to this talk. And I've also supplied them with the proper colors because they were doing yellow a different way. This is one of the crazy back corners of emulation. IBM CGA displays dark yellow, not as dark yellow, but brown. That is not the card doing it. The monitor actually has a little broken trace out to darken yellow to brown, just in the monitor. And you'd be like, why? I think I researched it too. They were trying to emulate the colors of the 3270 terminal or something like that. But you wouldn't know that if you hadn't actually seen a CGA monitor and seen it as brown and not dark yellow, and so their colors were dark yellow. So, yeah, I mean, it's just like the scene. Contribute where you can. So, yeah, I've pointed out a few things to them, but I know this much. So, any others? No? Well, thanks for coming.